everyone. Welcome back to the DeFi Scoop. Everything you need to know about DeFi and beyond. I'm your host, DeFi Dave, and I am here with Mr. DAOHaus himself, Spencer Graham. How's it going, Spencer?
Hey Dave, how's it going? I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I was saying I love your MCon shirt. That had to be my favorite conference of the year, and I would say that was the first conference that really got me DAO pilled.
It was fantastic. I'm actually surprised we didn't end up running into each other or talking there, because it was just so cool to have like such a small, relatively, but like vibrant and engaged set of people. It was amazing.
Yeah, and it was people all across Web3. You had your DAO people, of course, but you had DeFi people like myself. I met a couple of NFT people, and you really see how the entire crypto community and culture has within Ethereum has really like segmented in these different areas.
Yeah, it's definitely segmented from like a narrative perspective. At least it has been, and then from a little bit culturally, but I think it's all going to kind of come back together. And DAOs use DeFi constantly. DAOs create NFTs and use NFTs. Mm-hmm. NFTs are starting to use more of the DeFi rails and kind of create their own. And like DeFi protocols are using NFTs and also creating DAOs themselves. So like it's all going to come like crashing back together, what I think is only going to be good ways.
Yeah, I agree. And like you said, you're seeing that more and more. I guess like my first question is, what is the right way you see a DAO utilizing NFTs and DeFi? Like what have you observed?
I don't think there's a good single answer to that question. DAOs are kind of encompassing all types of human organizations, or at least have the potential to. And that means there's a bunch of different ways to do things in a DAO. And that's going to depend on what the DAO is trying to do and like why it exists and what its goals are and how it's going about them. And that's going to include different ways of using DeFi and different ways of using NFTs.
What are some successful early iterations of DAOs that you've noticed or that you observed in crypto so far and that have served as a model for others? Like the first ones that come to mind is Moloch DAO, but are there others?
Yeah, so like Moloch DAO being kind of the one that kicked back off a lot of the thinking about what is possible with DAOs and sort of this new DAO wave that we've been riding for the past year or two. And then that has obviously spun off a lot of other DAOs that are using the Moloch DAO framework. DAOHaus, where I spend most of my time, is itself built on that. And then also its whole reason for being is to support other DAOs in using that kind of infrastructure. Yeah. And so there's a number of those DAOs like Raid Guild and Metacartel, Metagamma Delta that have been really successful. But then there's a whole other type of DAO, which is like kind of the bigger sort of typically more in the DeFi space and like Web3 public infrastructure kind of space, like ENS and Gitcoin, where membership in the DAO is more permissionless. It's defined by holding a token. And I think there's been some really excellent examples of how that can work really well, or at least show that it can work really well. Compound with the comp token and their governance being like the first really big example of that, kicked off all of DeFi summer as well. Those are focusing on very different things and trying to accomplish very different things from a more smaller permissioned community-centric DAOs. But both, I think, show a lot of promise.
For viewers that are unfamiliar, how would you define Moloch, and what do you think is the best way to slay Moloch?
I know that you've had Amin on the podcast, so I'm definitely stepping into like, I'm definitely not going to do as good a job as he did or would. But I guess my personal definition of Moloch actually is probably pretty similar to his. I've been inspired by a lot of what he has had to say and done in this area. But it's kind of the thing inside all of us that doesn't allow us to fully internalize what other people are facing and other people's incentives. We are always kind of looking out for ourselves or the people that we love. And that often creates really fundamental conflicts of interest between people. And even when, if you zoom out further, you could find commonalities and alignment of interests. So I've kind of like throughout history, that's been the case, that like if you sort of zoom out, you can find better alignment of interests. But it's really, really hard to zoom out when in the moment what matters is like you against some other guy, or your tribe against some other tribe, et cetera, et cetera. The story of communication technology has been like allowing us to zoom farther and farther out. But that has also come with a lot of created a lot of ways to create or to form bigger and bigger tribes that like go against each other.
Yeah.
So of course, then you have to zoom even farther out. And like the farther you zoom out, the closer you get to like we're all living on this world together. So we have to find a way.
Do you think DAOs give us the
But
tools to
yeah,
zoom out better and zoom out more effectively, giving us a sharper image of the whole?
I think they do. So there's, and that kind of speaks to this like big token defined DAO where it's like really permissionless and it sort of seeps through everything. I
Hmm.
think that's one of the strongest value propositions of that concept, where if you sort of like infuse everything with a little bit of ownership over this thing, then you start to align incentives across like the entire fabric of humanity in an ideal sense.
If we can just airdrop a token on top of all of humanity.
But there's like I think what DAOs do is also create another way to slay Moloch, which is to like more closely align incentives within a smaller group. And that's what kind of the Moloch DAO and the Moloch DAO framework does a really good job of. Once again, it's kind of like two different approaches to it that both can work really well, or at least have the promise to work really well.
What was your first foray into DAOs? When we spoke yesterday, you said you were working in healthcare. You were pretty down the crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum rabbit hole, and then you discovered Raid Guild. Am I correct?
Yeah, there's kind of a couple steps
Yeah.
in between there, but it was yeah, I discovered Raid Guild primarily through meeting some really awesome people through ETH Denver 2020. I'm very excited for ETH Denver 2022 because it'll be kind of the 2-year anniversary of like a really important inflection point in my like Web3 Ethereum journey. Um, but I met some awesome people at ETH Denver, and like through working with them a little bit more, got introduced to Raid Guild, and then ended up working with and then joining Raid Guild a little bit later. That kind of just introduced me to what DAOs can do and how powerful the concept of like sharing control over assets and this like group thing can be. I think that like as I look back, the thing that's probably the most remarkable to me was like I didn't really know any of those people. I had met like two of them in person, and then the rest were just like kind of like random internet contacts. But through the magic of this DAO construct and the DAOHaus platform, trust was created between or among all of us in a way that allowed us to be like really vulnerable with each other. So we could create new things and experiment and try stuff and fail together, fail individually, but always have the support of everybody in a very fundamental and really magical way. I don't think I recognized that what was really happening at the time. So like looking back, it's really cool. And I
Yeah.
think one of the things that drives me a lot in like what I'm doing today and where I'm focusing my time is how to scale that out to as many people as possible and give as many people a taste of that as we can.
Yeah. So basically, both the Moloch DAO framework and the DAOHaus tools give basically you the opportunity to trust these strangers on the internet and do work and do business and develop relationships with them that otherwise could not have existed, let's say, a decade ago.
Or like 2 years ago.
Or 2 years ago, or even two
Yeah.
years, even 2 years ago. Wow, that's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah,
And
it's really
this,
cool.
and so then, what was your path after Raid Guild? You joined DAOHaus after that, or was there more steps in between?
Uh, Sort of parallel steps, but yeah, pretty much. I had also been working on a couple other projects, including ClearFund, sort of the on-chain trust minimized quadratic funding protocol.
Hmm.
Also, some a side project of my own that I was working on with a couple other people called SaveDai, and then another side project called Commit Pool. But I met through Raid Guild. Like, there's a heavy overlap between kind of the some of the early members of Raid Guild and the early creators of DAOHaus. So I started getting involved in DAOHaus through Raid Guild, and like really fell in love with the concept of enabling more groups and more communities, more people to have that kind of experience that I had had.
What is DAOHaus for people that don't know?
There's a bunch of different ways to think about what DAOHaus is, but the super high level version is that DAOHaus is the home for purpose driven community DAOs. So these are like groups of people that want to come together to like go after some shared purpose. That shared purpose could be like accomplishing a very specific goal. It could be more just like living shared values or like appreciating something that they all have in common.
Hmm.
But they're doing it in a way that is very community centric and focused on the humans involved. What DAOHaus provides to make that possible is a like no code framework or platform for forming Moloch DAOs and then participating in and expanding the capabilities of Moloch DAOs. And so we've sort of expanded on that over time, and it's become almost like an operating system for those types of communities at the human layer, at the like kind of user experience layer.
What are some cool DAOs that you've seen come out of DAOHaus? Like any single one or a few that come to mind?
One that kind of came out of nowhere, but then one of the early people in that has become a DAOHaus contributor was the Pyrion DAO, which was a DAO, still is, on the XDAI, or I guess soon to be Gnosis chain network, that was dedicated towards allowing people to come together and pool their resources and start to run validators and earn staking rewards on the XDAI network and in some other networks as well. That was like a really novel use case for what we were building that we hadn't even really thought of. So that was really cool to see. Another one is, well, I mentioned Meta Gamma Delta earlier. They have really started to thrive and like run hard after their mission of supporting women in Web3. It's been really cool to see how everything that they've been doing and how they've been using our tools.
Did Constitution DAO come out of DAOHaus, or was that somewhere different?
That was different. We learned from what they were doing, and we're starting to work on some tools that would help DAOs that were inspired by Constitution DAO do things in a little bit of a different way, depending on what they want to do. But yeah, Constitution DAO used some different stuff.
One thing we talked about yesterday when we were just getting to know each other was, there's DAO recruitment, getting that initial user attention, but like DAO attention, and you get a lot of people joining the DAO. But the thing that matters most is after you get their attention, you need it for them to stay in the DAO, participate, contribute, retention. So like, what do you think is like the problem facing like DAO member retention, and like what are like some ways you see that getting improved over time?
I think there's a lot of things, like, well, one, a lot of problems, and then a lot of different ways to approach those problems. I can probably talk about some of the ways that I've been thinking about this, and we've been thinking about this within DAOHaus, and a little bit in Raid Guild too. One of the things that is so cool about DAOs is that they allow contributors to the DAOs to engage in a much more fluid way relative to like a workplace where you're like employed full time, or maybe employed like part time, and then you have this like very rigorous number of hours or like amount of time that you need to focus on that job. In a DAO, you just like kind of you can kind of float in and float out and contribute where you find there's value or where you want to contribute. That's amazing. And the fact that you are in control of what you want to do is incredible. It kind of puts some people in a bit of a challenging position, and this was a position that I found myself in, where I was like floating in and out of like 7 different projects, and I felt like I wasn't able to focus on any one of them or like be as productive or as value producing in any one of them as I kind of know I can be or want to be. And what I found that helped, and what I've been working on trying to do more of, is like making more concrete commitments to fewer of them. So like more, even just for myself, like defining that I'm just like personally committing to working on this DAO or on like this work stream for like roughly this amount of time, or like roughly this amount of like focus energy. And then I can, pick and choose what else I'm doing other than that, but like more clearly compartmentalizing where I'm devoting my energies. That has really helped. And I think DAOs can kind of help contributors do that by giving them the option to make commitments to the DAO, and that for the DAO to make sort of reciprocal commitments back to them, and creating this like closer or tighter bond that's still fundamentally like in the contributor's control. But if they want to commit, they can do so.
From how you describe this, I can't help but notice how bottom up DAOs are in terms. It seems like it is the contributors are in control. They decide like what DAOs they want to join, what they want to work on, how hard they want to work on it, and then it's up to the DAO to compensate them or reward them accordingly. And like you said, I think that's the thing that's so hard for people to grasp, even myself, is how fluid DAOs are now. Like even the definition of DAOs, how they function, it seems it's so new that it can't be anything else but fluid. And I think that's to its advantage. Do you see this fluidity to continue? Do you think this will be a foundational part of DAOs to come in the future, or do you see more rigid structures coming?
I see both. What I see is DAOs giving contributors options to pick one or the other, or some kind of somewhere between the two. And I see DAOs giving contributors those options, and I see contributors picking what works best for them or what they think is going to work best for them. Contributors within a single DAO choosing different things and engaging in the way that they want to engage, and that creating like DAOs that do that are going to be able to attract a larger number of contributors, or pick from a wider pool of contributors, because they're giving contributors what they want and what works best for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people who work really well in that fluid context are going to continue to do so, and people who a little bit more like me, where they feel like they need to set more structure for themselves or need a little bit more help, are going to get that too. And so I think we're going to get kind of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, two examples of fluid DAOs that I see working in DeFi that have been working are, one is Yearn. Yearn has been around for a year and a half, and I think they're a great example of a DAO that just works. And also Ohm and Olympus. Olympus is a great example, and like everything that they've done. And so, like, what are your thoughts on like these DeFi DAOs that work? Like, how do you know like what makes them tick? Like, what have you observed in them that makes them work?
So I can't speak too much to the kind of the internal workings of those DAOs, and I know a lot less about the Ohmies than I do about Yearn. What I do know about Yearn is has always really impressed me. The kind of the quality of the people that they've been able to kind of attract and keep together is like really remarkable. And it kind of goes to show how, I think to your point, like having a fluid structure can be extremely attractive to the right kind of people who want to come together and are very self-motivated and are very considerate and thoughtful about how they do things. And Yearn has like landed on this amazing mix of fluidity, but like also stickiness with the way they've been able to create structures for themselves.
Yeah, no, for sure. I remember when Yearn first came out in the middle of DeFi summer. I was like, what is this? This is like the Bitcoin of DeFi. That was the comparison of, and then, I have to give it to, it's one thing for a DAO to start and have like a bunch of hype in the beginning, but it's another thing to, go through the storm and go through the down periods. And, it says like a lot about the DAO and the people in the DAO that, they've stuck around to keep building. And, now it's, people might call DeFi 1.0, but a lot of parts of DeFi 1.0 underpin all of DeFi, whether it's Wi-Fi or Curve, Yeah. I guess like what are some of the biggest issues you've seen facing DAOs?
I think a big issue that a lot of DAOs are going to face, and this is mostly oriented around the bigger token defined DAOs, or even the smaller DAOs that are using tokens to define membership and voting power and all of that. The big challenge they're going to face is that there's a lot of danger in that when you kind of have your token on a DEX and anybody can buy it and come in and just like start swinging. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of challenges, both like from an internal organizational like focus perspective, and we might have been seeing a little bit of this kind of thing with Sushi recently, where they found it challenging to maintain focus and kind of all like get consensus around the way they were going to do stuff and the direction that they were going to take, with like people coming in from left field constantly and talking about all sorts of different things. But also like the more extreme version of that is like something more explicitly adversarial, like competing organization or just somebody who has it out for a given DAO, just like a whale buying up a ton of a DAO's tokens and then starting to vote maliciously or do things like push things in a way like hostile takeover kind of stuff. And that starts to get really scary when you have permissionless purchasing of tokens and the ability to engage with those tokens.
Yeah.
I have this like simultaneous hope that this does happen in a very minimal way so that people's eyes are kind of open to the risks. I also hope it doesn't happen because that would be bad.
I'm sure it's bound to happen. It's just a matter of what it will look like and how that DAO will respond to a hostile takeover per se.
I think there's lots of ways for DAOs to protect themselves. and there's like a whole spectrum of ways. Like one is to not have a token at all, which has trade-offs, of course. Another is to have like multi kind of tiers or like multiple things that you can do with the token or without the token. So like needing to stake the token or have some a little bit more permissioned access to governance power
Mm-hmm.
if you have the token, all the way up to things that are like still fully permissionless but avoid the like naive capture stuff. Like conviction voting is really intriguing.
What's that?
So conviction voting is basically it turns a decision from a one-time like, hey, we're all going to decide right now, like we're going to vote, and if we have more yes votes than no votes, then we're going to proceed with this. It turns it from like a binary decision to more of a over time accumulation of signal. And if the signal crosses a threshold, which varies by how important the decision is, then it proceeds. So you have to like basically be committing your resources towards a vote that you want to have happen, or like towards a decision that you want to have happen over a period of time. So it makes it much harder for you to just like buy a bunch of tokens, slam down your whale stack, and like
Go all in.
change the vote, and then like sell your tokens later. Um, and it's also much more fluid and has a lot of roots in biology and the way that biological systems make things.
Has conviction voting been used outside of DAOs? Like who like came up with this?
Well, I think One Hive has been doing a lot of work in this area, and their Gardens DAO framework makes heavy use of it. They've collaborated a lot with the Block Science organization, and I think Aragon was also doing some work in that area as well.
Okay, so conviction voting is basically you're voting over a continued period of time. So it's not just one vote, one time, here, black and white, yes or no. Are like different parts of the question voted on over time, or is it just like a constant temperature check over like a few days or a few weeks?
Yeah, I think kind of the latter. So one example would be like a DAO, or yeah, a DAO wants to decide whether it wants to send or spend, let's say, 10,000 DAI on some initiative. That 10,000 DAI, that decision would require some amount of conviction from the organization for it to proceed.
Mm-hmm.
And that conviction would then be accumulated by people staking their DAO tokens, or maybe their DAI, or just some token that the DAO has decided upon over a period of time. So the conviction is a function of both the magnitude that people are staking and the amount of time that they've been staking it.
I think we've seen different forms of conviction voting. Like I wouldn't even call it conviction voting, but this kind of reminds me of how Curve has its tokenomics, where people stake Curve for V Curve. To vote. Well, I guess it is. They're literally voting on where to set the gauges and set the emissions. And with Frax, with like their VFXS, the same thing. So it's similar. Like people lock their tokens for a certain amount of time, and they vote, which directions they want the emissions. And I guess this is the social version of that, in a sense. Maybe not entirely, but yeah.
The foundational primitive there is like forcing you to like forego an extended opportunity cost in order to gain power over the decisions that are happening.
My next question would be like, how would you define a DAO? Like, what is a DAO to you?
This is well timed. This is sort of a personal journey, both like really unimportant to like have a definition of a DAO in some sense, but also I think very important that we all like settle on understanding what a DAO is and what a DAO is not, or what is not a DAO. And I want to be clear that it's okay for things not to be DAOs. Like not everything has to be a DAO to be valid and important and relevant. But I think it is important to be able to categorize things so that we understand their properties, so people know what they're getting when they're engaging with that kind of thing. And then also from a broader perspective of like developing tools for different types of organizations and communities. Something that is a particular kind of DAO is going to need a different tool than some other kind of organization. So I think just fundamentally, this question is really important for us to answer, and I've been trying to work on it quite a bit. And where I've landed, I don't think it's perfect yet, but is kind of focuses on collective control over common resources. So a DAO is, you could call it like a network of people or a network of individuals. You could also say organization. That's fine too. That kind of collectively is managing common resources that they like that group of people controls together in service of some kind of shared purpose, where the power over those resources, like the power to execute actions that use those resources, is distributed among everybody in that group, among all those individuals. I think it's that distribution of executive power across everybody that is the unique thing that organizations today just fundamentally can't, or traditional organizations cannot do. And smart contracts and kind of Web3 native infrastructure and technology allows that, and that I think is a magical property that DAOs have.
Yeah, DAOs are really the ultimate tools to bring democracy into whatever the next phase of human development and organization is. I feel like they say Bitcoin was the first DAO, and it was. I agree with that definitely.
I agree fully.
People coming together basically to decide, under a common mission, deciding on like how to guide this. I consider Bitcoin an organism that just kept on growing, especially in the way that it's decentralized and just expanding further and further. I've always considered DAOs a social technology first and foremost, more than like an actual like technical technology. It's just a group of people that come together around a certain idea. Whether they have resources or not. Usually I guess they should. It would be easier for you to like create tooling for DAOs that have resources than DAOs that don't. Otherwise, it's just a group chat. But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a nuanced and challenging thing to like. I think people get in debates about this a lot because there's this distinction, I think, in my mind between like the DAO ethos and like doing something in a DAO-like way, which a group of people in Discord can absolutely do. They can like adopt this ethos. There's a distinction between that and then like actually creating a DAO itself and like forming as a DAO. Obviously, there's heavy overlap between those two. So like the ethos and the culture and like the experience that you have as part of a group like that is super important. And to me, the best way to ensure that remains and is persistent and is resistant to attack or resistant to capture is to infuse that organization and like undergird that ethos with structure and with this like technological infrastructure, basically. So we can encode that ethos into the software that we write, basically, and that's what a DAO smart contract is. It kind of undergirds the ethos of the organization and helps it maintain that ethos over time, even as different people come in and out, and even as like that original culture might change over time.
And from just having this conversation, I feel like this ethos that underpins DAOs and DAO technology is fluidity, democracy, shared ownership around a common cause, whether that be short-term single issue or long-term very lofty goal. I think that's what a DAO is about. And like, how would you define like DAOs and how much they're different than traditional organizations that exist today that are commonplace?
So I think if we kind of zoom out, I think DAOs have the capability, at least eventually, of like you can do all of the current organizations with DAOs. Probably not yet, but like eventually we'll get to that point. But it's definitely the case that right now the way that and the people and the ethos that most DAOs have is very much this like communal kind of community focused sort of thing, which is amazing, and I hope continues as long as possible. I do expect though that there are going to be DAO structures that have a little bit of less of that. And I think maybe I personally won't be as attracted to being a part of those kind of DAOs, but I actually do think that's going to be a really important inflection point for this entire space and maybe even for the world. If we can create ways for people who don't necessarily share the same ethos that all of us who are like early and in this space now feel, but create ways for them to create organizations in such a way that still empower the individuals within those organizations, then I think that's going to open up a ton of possibilities for everybody to like maintain autonomy over their work, even while they're contributing to organizations that don't necessarily have like that same ethos. it's like almost like a Trojan horse of that ethos into organizations or like into founders that don't necessarily share it. And I think that'll be a really important moment when we're able to do that.
It's a lot easier for people to find like their purpose, quote unquote, within a DAO than they can in traditional organizations. Like I have so many friends that aren't in crypto that work in whatever the traditional corporate world, and they have Sunday scaries and they like dread going to work, or their work is just mindless, and they're like, I have one friend that's like, I can't believe they even pay me. Like I really don't do anything. And I feel like and I feel like from just talking to my friends, like seeing like comparing people in like I guess the physical Web 2 whatever traditional world, like I feel like people in crypto, like you can tell by like how the way people talk and the way people act, like they're a lot more purpose driven. And I would like to see that, I think ideally we would see that kind of ethos exported into, further and further in the same way like you see NFTs kind of proliferating throughout mainstream culture. I would love to see DAOs proliferate in the same way, giving, but in like a genuine way, not in a gimmicky, like, oh, like this and that. Like it's like, how do we export the ethos and the values in genuine manner? And I think,
100%.
Another thing I was going to say is I'm a big fan of the medium is the message. And I feel like the technology that DAOs are built upon is very important with instilling that ethos. And if we alter the technology, like even though it may be difficult to use, and I think it should be easier, but the challenge I think that faces all of us is how do we make it easier for people to onboard without kind of sacrificing the values and the ethos that's instilled in the technology?
Totally. I think that's a big challenge that this space as a whole faces, or it's like you could just sort of generalize it to like user experience.
Yeah.
And I think David Phelps actually had some really great thoughts on this maybe yesterday or the day before, comparing the differences between Web 2 and Web 3 products. In Web 2, so much of user experience was like removing friction and creating these like addiction feedback loops to increase engagement, at least on the consumer side of things. Because that was the goal of these Web 2 products, is to like keep you coming back and serve you up ads so that the company makes money. Like the whole point was like making things as easy and fast and quick and like thoughtless as possible.
Yeah.
And like digging into the like lizard brain of everything.
Literally just giving people those dopamine hits.
Yeah, exactly. But in Web 3, the user like we are, so much of what we talk about is how challenging it is and how much friction there is, and that's all true. And like definitely we have room for improvement there. But I think a big part of the Web3 experience is not like dopamine, but it's instead it's ownership and it's control and it's intention. The user or the individual is in control of what they're doing, and so they should be doing things with intention because they own the outcome, they own what's going on. So it still makes sense, or it makes sense for there to be some friction for Web3 applications, Web3 products, to not let that go and to not abstract away the ownership components of the thing.
Yes.
And to really lean into that, because it is a mindset shift, and that's the power of it.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't try to abstract that away. We should lean into it and make sure that people are understanding that they own the outcome of what they're doing, and they need to do it with intention. And if we do that right, then they'll feel the power of it and they'll come back and back and back.
Yeah, it seems like Web 2 is much more about short-term gain, for short-term feedback loops, like coming back with those dopamine hits to serve those ads. And as we see, like as the result of kind of this feedback loop, the data gets grossly taken advantage of in ways that it's hard for us to even imagine the scope of it all. But with Web 3, it's not about short-term, it's about long-term. It's about aligning long-term incentives. And the thing is, when you have an intent towards something, that intent doesn't materialize 10 minutes later or even the next day or next week. Like intent, like whatever your goal is, the mission is, that's a long-term game. That's a long-term play. And in the end, that like dopamine hit at the end of it is if you successfully, go through with your mission and do it, just do it successfully. That's how I kind of view it. And it might take some time to get people thinking in that matter, especially for people I've just kind of been in this, including myself, in this hypnotism of these short-term feedback loops. I mean, hell, we're all on Twitter. So,
Yeah.
I think over time, gradually, if we can see a shift towards more longer-term thinking, I'm hopeful for it. It's a matter of painting a picture that people can aspire to. I think that's like one really good thing that religion did. I guess 2,000 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
It gave people like a higher purpose, a higher sense. And I was saying like DAOs are a religion. I mean, crypto is a religion, to be honest. If you look at it, people have like the same kind of religious convictions when it comes to certain chains. We'll put it that way. But in the sense of like giving something higher for people to aspire to, DAOs provide a framework for people to do that and for groups to take hold.
So what you were saying, that like you don't feel like you're really working and you just like somehow get paid to just like hang out kind of,
Yeah.
or like do the things you would do otherwise. And I feel the exact same way. Like I'm excited to start work every day, and it doesn't really feel like work a lot of the time
Yeah.
because, well, one, we're working with fun people and it's sort of like doing fun stuff, but also because it's super meaningful and we have like it aligns with at least the stuff a lot of us are doing right now, aligns with a lot of what we want to see in the world and what like the change that we want to help bring about. So it doesn't feel like a short-term grind. It
Hmm.
feels more like we're having fun moving towards the things that we want to see.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't have to be like exactly like what it doesn't even have to be the biggest goal. It's just more just like you said, people just vibing, just getting things done day after day. And sometimes that's just all you need. I know like I'm in Ink DAO, and like we don't really have any like set goals. I mean, we have things like we want to do, but it's really just a group just vibing, and I just appreciate that. It's just a network of
Yeah.
people, and I consider Ink DAO more on like the cultural part of DAOs than actually like in it with a token or like anything technical. Maybe it will be like that in the future. Who knows? But that's why I view DAOs as a cultural technology. The next thing I wanted to go about is this idea of parallel structures. I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but Balaji did a podcast a while ago, Tim Ferriss, where he talks about parallel structures kind of emerging alongside governmental structures, and he gives an example of like a pothole DAO, and it's just a DAO that's dedicated to filling potholes in a city. And eventually, like it fills enough potholes that it accomplishes its mission. Maybe it has a treasury now. Maybe it can do something else. Maybe it can shovel everyone's driveway in a snowstorm, and it just goes around doing that. And over time, you see this DAO gain legitimacy among the populace performing public functions and public goods that you would expect the government to. I'm not saying the government isn't doing that, but I'm just saying this is probably doing like a more efficient job. So like, what do you think of parallel systems emerging that are powered by DAOs, and like where do you see this going?
I mean, we definitely have that right now in a sense. Like everybody that is working today in DAOs is like working essentially in a parallel structure. They would have been doing maybe similar things, maybe not similar things within a more traditional corporate or like company or nonprofit organizational structure. And today they're doing that in DAOs. And maybe one way to think about that is like instead of we're in sort of a parallel structure mode, is that new things are being created, new organizations or new communities are being created, not changing old communities to use the new technologies.
Hmm.
And I think that's going to happen too. Like there's definitely going to be some companies that like change into DAOs because they see the benefits. But I kind of suspect that more of what's going to happen is new organizations that might have instead been traditional companies, new communities are going to form within the DAO world, within the Web3 world, and they're going to start to spread out and maybe replace some of the things that more traditional organizations would have been doing otherwise.
Yeah. And do you think everything should become a DAO, or like some things are better off not being DAOs, or some things better off being like traditional corporations?
I do think it's possible for DAOs to essentially replicate any other structure, but in a better way. I think that might take a long time to come to pass, and for us to have the right tools and patterns to do that. So there's one area where like the way we currently think about DAOs does not work very well, which is when you have like really high value um, but fast decisions that you need to make. Like
Mm.
if the question is, we need to decide in like the next day how to spend $7 billion. Like that's not going to like a DAO is going to really struggle with that. And the reason it's going to struggle with that is because the way you make fast decisions is by having more of a hierarchical, smaller decision-making base, right? So like just a few people or maybe even one person is making the decision, so you don't have all this like communication overhead. And you can do that within a DAO. Like you can have delegation of responsibilities, but in a DAO you have to have the ability to revoke that power.
I mean, Curve DAO did that pretty recently with the whole Moochie thing that happened. Mochi, I don't even know how to say it, last month. And that was the first time they acted on emergency powers.
The challenge is that like the higher the value the decision is, the harder it is for the DAO, for those like revoking powers to actually hold the decision makers accountable.
Mm-hmm.
If you could steal $7 billion by like pressing a button and nobody else can stop you, and the only problem would be you would get kicked out of the organization, there's a really high incentive to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So like, if the value of it is lower, then if it's like maybe a few $1,000s, then you're not going to make that decision. Those high value, fast decisions are really challenging, I think, in DAO contexts.
Yeah. That's definitely going to be an issue facing DAOs, and one of many issues facing DAOs in the future. The next thing I want to ask about was, have you noticed, like, especially from younger generation and Zoomers, people who might be first getting into the workforce, people that are just DAO native and all that they know is DAOs, and that's like their first kind of experience in the quote unquote workforce, and how they like think about their job and their working and contributing. Like, have you noticed those people come about, and what have you noticed about them?
I have. It's really cool to see, and especially within Raid Guild, there are some who are live in countries where finding a job that would pay types of salaries that we in the Western world are maybe more used to is really challenging. So it's been really cool to see them just like skip all the bullshit that they would have had to go through if they had gone the more traditional route and just like start working in Raid Guild and like making pretty good money, and like really good money for where they live, and just doing that and having like the choice of where to work. That's been really cool. I do think it's going to be interesting to see, like, as we get basically a new generation of people that have that option. I think that is probably going to really accelerate the transition away from traditional organizations, because there's a lot of us who like kind of who see the benefits now, but it's really hard to like, even telling my friends about it, it's like really hard to get them to understand in like a really like legitimate way just how much different it is and how much better it can be than a traditional working situation. So like so you kind of have to just live it to really, really get it. So when we have this new generation of people that have just been living it, it's going to be a huge difference.
I find the same thing with DeFi native people as well. Or you have some youngins, like especially for example, like Rory Capital, like people that are like devs there, like they're thinking of finance in terms of DeFi. Same thing with like devs, like in the last podcast I had Hilmar and Lewis on, and they learn how to code only on Solidity. So they only think about coding through the realms of Solidity. For me personally, I got into crypto in 2017. So, probably a year after I graduated school. So I consider myself pretty crypto native, but even, I was still like working at a traditional organization that was in crypto. It's just been like really, over like the past year, like working at Gelato, it's been really interesting just going full force into just this whole Web3 universe, and, whether it's the way organizations work, how people are compensated, the culture outside of it, the culture like on crypto Twitter, and the culture, you kind of see it, being exported outside of crypto Twitter, especially through NFTs and through Good Mornings and stuff. And some of it is sometimes the organizations are like very tasteful and they do a good job adapting to the culture, and other times like you see Pepsi saying "whack me" everywhere, and it's just absolute cringe.
Yeah.
But I guess what do you think about Web3 becoming like the rebranding of crypto and becoming the more polite buzzword of how to describe this universe? I mean, you see the New York Times article where Google and Facebook are shaking that, and they're afraid of their employees jumping ship over to It's basically you. You're basically like Facebook's like their worst.
I'm
So,
fine with that.
yeah.
I'm cool with that.
So like, how would you define like Web3, and like, what's your reaction of it blowing up so much that now these traditional Web2 organizations are having meetings on how to retain their employees from defecting over to Web3?
Well, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's dope. I think it's dope too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing. I think to some degree Web3 is inevitable, or like the proliferation of Web3 is inevitable,
Hmm.
especially because it's built on these like very, very hard to stop technologies and this really infectious culture that has kind of sprung up around them.
Yeah.
Um, I like there's been a lot of like Web 2 attacking Web 3 even just in the last like day or two. I sort of don't care in a way. Like
Yeah.
it, it's gonna be, and maybe I'm naive here, but like it's gonna be inevitable. Like some set of the population doesn't get it, or like has a entrenched interest against it. So that's too bad for them, I guess.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll slow things down, but it's not going to really stop um, with the progress that we're making. If what we're doing in Web3 changes what a Web2 company is doing to retain its employees, then that's great, because like part of our ethos is empowering contributors and employees and workers. Um, and so if that happens outside of Web3, but because of Web3, that's awesome. And that's great for everybody. I wouldn't call all of crypto Web3. Like I don't think Bitcoin is
I
Web3.
don't think it's
I
either. I
don't.
saw that question. I don't consider Bitcoin Web3.
Yeah, like crypto is a particular technology that, or cryptocurrencies are a particular technology that is and can be infused in Web3, and much of Web3 is built off of technologies that either are or also used for cryptocurrencies, but definitely it's not one and the same. One thing that is very similar is like the focus on individual autonomy. Um, Obviously, Bitcoin is very highly indexed on that.
Yeah.
Um, but Web3 is especially in the DAO space more and more, and like the WAGMI stuff that like, or just that direction, that ethos is also much more focused on the communal part of things.
Yeah.
And I think that's been a beautiful evolution that I've
Yeah.
seen from the like more libertarian personal autonomy focused stuff that
Yeah.
were like originally crypto was focused on as much.
It's that
More so.
statement: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. That's just. I feel like that's the one statement that encompasses DAOs.
Yeah, it's really
Uh,
good.
Outside of DAOs, is there anything else in Web3 that interests you? Like, are you like into JPEGs? Are you degening into any DeFi protocols on Avalanche or some random side chain? Like, what else are you into in this Web3 world?
I am well. I'm kind of intellectually into all of it. Where I've found myself like spending more of my time outside of DAOs is on in the generative art world.
Hmm.
Art with art blocks being a primary example. Um, or I guess more generally than that, just on-chain native art, I think is really fascinating. I love that it creates this really interesting combination of like a relationship between the artist and the collector or patron or whatever you call that person. A really interesting relationship between them and the medium itself. Especially when you like for generative art, when you mint it, like you are like also creating it in a way. It's not just the artist that's creating it, because it's your transaction hash that essentially is resulting in the
Yeah.
image or the sounds or whatever it is that ends up being created. And then it's also this like interaction with the medium itself, and everything is happening on chain and has no dependencies, or like essentially no dependencies with anything off chain is very it's unique. And that to me is attractive. It's a new thing that's made possible by this technology, and the like mixing together of the technology and the artistic expression is really cool.
Yeah, I agree. You're gonna have a whole new generation of artists interacting with the chain and utilizing the chain, not only the chain, but like you said, their audiences and being part of the work. And it's gonna be really cool to see what happens with that. I'm also a fan of art blocks as well. One of the final things I wanted to ask is, what advice do you have for people that are just starting DAOs, or whether they're starting their DAO journey as a contributor? Like, what would be your advice to them? And if you're creating your own DAO, what would be your advice to them?
So the first one on contributors is be prepared to not be told what to do. I think many people have said this before. This is nothing new, but it is a fun, like a totally different kind of working environment. What makes DAOs powerful is that you decide what you want to do, and the aggregation of what everybody wants to do is what actually happens in the DAO. So if nobody's telling you what to do, just like you can scan the bounty list or talk to other people and see what might be valuable. But even if you don't have, there's like nothing anybody else is saying, there's always room, and people are always going to appreciate you just doing something. And even if it doesn't end up being used by the DAO, you just expressing what you're good at and kind of like building something that somebody else can see is going to be helpful for you to find out what it is that's going to be both valuable for you and the DAO. So really just starting somewhere, no matter what it is the best way to go about it. On the starting a DAO side, I think it's really tempting to hold on to power and control in the beginning, because there's this sense that you need to move quickly and kind of iterate your way towards finding something that works. I think that can work, but what I would encourage new DAO creators and founders and summoners to do is find a way to give away a lot of power really fast, because that's going to be the best way to empower other people and attract other people to what you're doing and make them feel like owners alongside of you, because that's what they're going to be if you give them power. And that's going to be the best way to kind of kickstart and seed a really strong culture of ownership and a community of kind of collaborative, cooperative entrepreneurship, which is really the power of, or one of the main powers of DAOs.
Cool. I feel like I've learned way more about DAOs in the past hour than I have in the past few months. Like, it started at MCon, really, like I said, my DAO pilling journey, and then just going to different conferences and mainly talking to different people like involved with DAOs from there. But like this gives like a lot better of a picture, this whole conversation. Where could people find you on social media or reach out to you?
Yeah, probably the best place is Twitter. My handle is
The Public Square.
The Public Square. My handle is kind of amalgamation of my first and last name, Spengra. That's the best place.
Yeah, that's all for now. Thanks everybody for listening, watching. If you like this, like, subscribe. I hope to be doing more of these in the future. And if you guys have any guests that you want, just put them down in the comments or just hit me up on Twitter at Dave Said That. I'm around. And thanks for listening, and thanks for coming on, Spencer.
Thanks for inviting me on. It was awesome, Dave.